design department, and I told them about my idea, and to my surprise, they actually wanted to help me do it. So they actually rigged up a flying machine, which is like a harness that usually you wear on your pelvis, but they put it on your chest. And they, there was a black, huge piece of plywood with kind of like plywood steps sticking out of it. And they attached a black kind of like rope to the harness so you couldn't see it. So she actually, at the end of the performance, which was all about Dracula, she backed up to the wall, and then she just started walking up the wall. And then when she was, on top of the wall, she was horizontal to the ground, the piece was over, and everyone came to take her bow, and she just like dropped her legs and bowed in the air. And there was something about seeing that for me, that this is a dream that I had, and I saw it. We talked about this, about having a vision and then acting out a vision in the community. I had that experience, and I can't even describe how exciting it was for me to see it, but even more so, the audience just went wild. It was my dream, but there's something about it that was so powerful, and that was it. I just was off and running. And Meredith came to see the performance and told me I was a genius. That's all I needed. I didn't care what anything else thought. But because she was, really interested in me. So after that, they kind of let me do what I wanted at the school. I wanted to do performances that were like evening length in theatrical spaces, and they would let me do it. And I was really experimenting. Very different from my classmates. The work that my classmates were doing, but I was being influenced by so much that was going on at that time. And then when I got out of college, it took a few years, but I found people that I could work with, and I ended up being one of the group of people early on at Performance Space 122 that were doing a lot of participation events. Many of the people had worked with Grotowski in Poland, who was doing like 5-day improvisations, and I wasn't able to go there. I couldn't afford it because by then I had spent all the money. But the people I was working with brought back those ideas. We would have all-night improvisations, and we would have night readings, and where we would just bring our journals and stuff to read and read simultaneously. And we were just doing all kinds of participation experiments. We had morning sessions with people who were interested in doing something other than a class or a rehearsal, but we wanted to dance and work and learn, and so there was a lot of really interesting stuff going on, and many of the people who were involved with that, have become major choreographers. It was a very fertile time, and we developed a way of a comfort with performing intimately, because we were performing for each other. That I think we then brought into larger venues and larger spaces. Oh, that's a long answer to your question.
That's interesting. I mean,
yeah.
It gives some context. It's good, and I think also now what you're talking about in these participation events and the way that you guys were starting to change the work with different forms of how to study this thing or work with the dance thing.
Yeah.
Is super interesting to me, and it's interesting in the context of the OSF work and the releasing work, and then it's also interesting in terms of choreographic work.
Yeah.
So I wanted to read this thing from what you sent me, this article from 1990 that Stephanie wrote called Politics and Method. And she said, "I'm gradually becoming more aware of the political implications of the artistic process, and this has reinforced my commitment to working the way I do. Although my process arose from an aesthetic need to see interesting work, I began to realize that what made interesting work interesting was all the underlying values that go into making and performing the work. The overt content of a work is not really the content, not what affects an audience." So, I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about how structure and process affect, I guess we could start with work, choreographic work.
Yeah. Well, what happened after that really was like, that's good. somehow, I mean, I think that, you know, those sort of blissful years, like, always come to an end, and it was, after that, it was kind of like every man and woman for him or herself, and people started, you know, doing the performances under their own name and advertising themselves, and so we were all like, okay, here we go. And we were kind of discovered by the Village Voice, and I started having a kind of a company. By 1984, I pretty much had a company that I was working with consistently, you know, starting then. I mean, it would change, but like that I would actually was working with a fixed group of people. And then we started having agents who were taking us on tour. I wrote that in 1987, I believe. And I was just, I don't think I had finished. I was in the process of making Cracky Destroyers, which is probably, you know, in terms of outward success, you know, sort of a huge hit, you know, very successful piece. That was it was the first time as a classical musician, I wasn't interested in working with music as a score, and so this is the first time I had done that, and I decided to go all out and make a choreographed piece to the most, you know, to some of the most familiar music, which is Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, first movement. But no, all three movements of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. You know, da 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 da. It's just like, I was told it was a terrible idea, but I did it anyway, and it ended up being, you know, maybe the most popular thing I ever did. But I brought, you know, I was always interested in seeing people be really powerful, and I wasn't satisfied with most of the dance I was watching because I just felt like the dancers weren't empowered enough. Like I would watch the choreographer because the choreographer what seemed to be expressing their inner life, whereas the dancers doing the choreographer's movement, maybe they were, you know, oftentimes technically better dancers than the choreographer, but not as interesting to watch, because to me it was like watching a dubbed movie, like they were expressing somebody else's inner life. And I was really interested in people, you know, being their whole selves, and so a lot of how I worked from that very early piece, Dracula, that I made, first major piece, I would just come with ideas to the rehearsal space and see how people work with those ideas, ways to improvise. And some of them were ideas that I personally was working with myself, and sometimes they were just things I thought of, you know, that I wanted to see what happened when they worked with them. And then, so people's movement was coming out of their own improvisations, not out of my improvisations. And so obviously people were moving differently, but they were moving with similar ideas. So I was always looking for ways to work that, so it was a very collaborative way of working from the start. Now, this way of working is a little more acceptable now, but back then it was a very unusual way of working. And, you know, maybe the choreographer would let the dancer improvise with some, you know, variations of what they had choreographed, but like to just give them a concept. And so there was a time when I decided I wanted to choreograph from improvisations that were videotaped. I first did that with myself, videotaped. I don't know, it's actually on YouTube. It's called The Ladder Dance. It's a dance I did with a ladder, getting lost on the way of the ladder. And I was sort of stepping in and out of my own image, and it was very fast. In fact, it was improvised, but I did it twice. I did it once, I watched the video, and I decided it wasn't good enough. But having watched the video, I felt like it just needed to be sharper, especially for video. So I did it again, and I was working with something called flux, which we're going to do tomorrow, which is kind of free association, but done physically. So you really are, you know, free associating from one movement idea to another. And it's sort of like stream of consciousness but in kinetic terms. And I watched it, and then I did it again, and I liked that better. And then after like the first few, maybe the first like 45 seconds, we speeded up the video just slightly, so it was really super fast. And that video was part of a performance called Chase Scene in 1984, which was about video and live and their relationship. And then I decided to learn that dance, and it was so super fast from the video, for another performance called Survey of Forms. And I had never learned from video. And I would go into the studio and literally I would work for 3 hours just to learn a few seconds. It was so hard. Plus my movement was so crazy and fast, and it was even faster because the video was speeded up. And I didn't know like the whole right-left thing, and just learning this complex movement. So I was learning how to learn. And so I did this on myself, and I'm very persevering. I mean, somebody said that like creativity is like 70, I don't know what percentage, but a large percentage of creativity is perseverance, which I think is true. But anyway, so I was very persevering. I learned the whole dance. I couldn't do it as fast in the video, but I did as fast as I could. And then the next piece I made was performed in 1987, but we made it in 86, 87, and that was Cranky Destroyers. And for that, I came in with ideas which were, some of them were that flux idea, but there was also this image which I stole in from Joan Skinner called Limbs of Fury, which she had done in a rehearsal that I was like a guest in her rehearsal. She used to have an improvising